All right, so with data visualization, there's a lot of information that can be had with data visualization, and there are different design techniques that can be applied. And as I mentioned earlier, the most important thing to consider is what is your story? And so use story as the guideline, or meaning what is it that you want to say as the guideline as to what kind of data visualization that you're going to use. A lot of times with data visualizations, however, we start to want to be able to kind of give an idea about how do we determine what is an effective design for our data visualizations. One idea is this term data to ink ratio. And so basically how much data is represented based on how much ink is used to represent it. So we have data ink, which is actually going to be used for the number or convey meaning to the data. And then we have non-data ink, which is basically parts of the chart that is used to more like frame the data, but not necessarily help in creating any kind of conveyance of that particular representation of the data. So what does that mean in real life? Well, let's take a look at this. Here is an example of a table that has low data to ink ratio. Now, this is a very common table. A lot of people do represent their data in this fashion. It's easy to read. But what we're looking at here is these numbers represent ink that is used, that is to effectively tell what's happening with the data. In addition, we have some labels that help us describe the data. And then also we have a title that kind of tells us what the story is of the data. Some of the additional things that are here is the borders of the table. And this is stuff that is not needed in order to be able to represent the data. So this is an example of low data to ink ratio. And so you can put this in a chart, right? And the trend chart kind of gives us much more fluidity to kind of tell us a story. But again, we're starting to see aspects like these lines here that are not really critical for being able to tell the data story. So if they were absent, they might be helpful. So this is another example of low data to ink ratios. So now to make that improvement, here we can see that all the grid lines are gone. But what's really interesting with this is that our eyes pick up on this white space that is between each column. And using a visualization technique called Gestalt Theory, our eyes end up filling in the space where those lines should be. So we're already visualizing there should be a line here, but we don't need to draw it, right? So now we use ink to represent the data, what the data is about, and give us a little bit of separation at a very minimal cost, right? So this has high data to ink ratio. And again, let's go back and look at this chart. Here, as I mentioned, we don't have those grid lines anymore. There's none of that crisscross. And so from a visual story standpoint, this has a low data to ink ratio. Okay, so that is an overview of data visualization. I'm going to pause right here, and we're going to get into the next PowerPoint in the next video. So this is dealing with data visualization with tables. We'll talk about this in greater detail. It's going to build off of this idea about data to ink ratios.